I didn't start off with this dream of being a business owner. In fact, I didn't have any training or any knowledge or any background in launching a small business. But what I did have was this drive or passion to change science textbooks. And really what happened is when my kids were little, I was looking at the elementary grade textbooks, and it occurred to me, based on my own experience going through school and not doing well in at least my first few chemistry classes, that elementary school textbooks simply do not prepare kids for high school and college. So let me see a little bit more about that. You know, when I was in high school, I made straight A's, graduated third in my class. I was good to go. Thought I wanted to be an oceanographer, but I definitely wanted to be a scientist. Turns out I get seasick, so I didn't end up going into oceanography.
Oops.
But I did end up going into biophysical chemistry. But I graduated high school and I walked into my first college level chemistry class, and I flunked my first exam, 38% on my first chemistry exam.
Well, shoot, no offense, but I was able to do that in high school. I was terrible at chemistry. Go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah. But here I am trying to be this scientist, and I flunked this chemistry exam. And really the effect it had on me was it made me feel like I was just kind of stupid, and I wasn't really smart enough to be a scientist, or I wasn't, and I felt like I had to play catch up, you know, with my peers for the remaining 4 years. And I did. I ended up doing really well. I graduated top 10 in my, college class. And once I put my mind to it, I'm going to go for it. And I studied and I got through college chemistry and organic chemistry and physical chemistry and so on. And then I went to graduate school and enjoyed graduate school, but science really started to come alive for me when I got to be through with all of my coursework and got the keys to the lab and got to play and start to ask and answer my own questions. And all of a sudden, I was this scientist. I was really passionate about what I was doing. I loved bench science. In fact, I still love bench science. And, you know, I was going through the regular trajectory, if you will, of eventually becoming a tenure track professor. And I got married and I had kids. And this was in the early 90s to mid 90s. And it's just challenging for women if you have kids in academia. I don't think it's as challenging now, but there weren't a lot of options for me when it came to a career path. And so I started homeschooling my own kids because the schools here in Albuquerque weren't great. And I noticed that the elementary textbooks were really simplified. And I thought about this and I thought, you know, when I went to college, I simply wasn't prepared for real chemistry or real physics or real biology. And the reason I wasn't prepared is because I hadn't really seen that material much. And if you think about developing a language for something, right, you have to be exposed to it over a period of time. You know, the first time we see something, it's all brand new and we don't really absorb much of it. But the next time we see it, we might absorb a little bit more. Understanding starts to seep in. And by the third or fourth time we're exposed to a term or a concept or something new, it's now more familiar and the understanding deepens. But our educational system withholds real chemistry and physics in the elementary grades and waits until high school, and there's simply not enough time to assimilate all that information and be prepared for college level STEM classes.
Yeah, and I mean, this is deep information. I mean, I know, like, I liked earth science because, like, oh, cool, bugs and like the sun and I guess and all that. I can't remember, but like when it got into the more complex, I lost the passion for it because it just simply became work.
That's exactly right. And a lot of students face this. You know, I actually have talked to a lot of adults who told me, you know, or have told me that, you know, I really wanted to be a doctor when I grew up, but I couldn't, I flunked my freshman chemistry and I couldn't be a doctor. I wanted to be a pharmacist, but, you know, I couldn't hack the physics or the chemistry. Or I wanted to be an astronaut and I couldn't really hack the physics or the chemistry or even sometimes the biology. And it's discouraging. You know, a lot of students opt out of STEM careers because they think that they're ready when they get into college and find out that they're simply not prepared for those upper level courses. And it really does, discourage and inhibit a lot of otherwise high achieving doctors and physicists and astronomers or whatever from going into those fields.
Yeah.
And
A term that you brought to my attention, lost Einsteins.
yes, exactly. Lost Einsteins. I believe there are a lot of lost Einsteins out there. And the lost Einstein is the kid who, because he doesn't or she doesn't have an exposure to those, to the terms and concepts and the practice of science that he or she needs, then they can't actually, they can't do it when they get older. And so they opt out. They simply opt out of those fields and they're lost, right? Otherwise, they could have pursued those careers.
Mm-hmm.
And so this became very pertinent for me. And I started writing science books. In fact, I was only going to write one chemistry book for my kids and leave it at that. But then I had friends who were like, can you write a book for us? And can you do more books? And can you do biology? And what about physics? And then what about, books for the lower grades?
Wow.
It just exploded. And the entrepreneurial piece really came about through trial and error. I my first year being a small business owner, I made a mind map where at the end of that year, I wrote down every mistake I made that year. And it was this huge, here's the company. And here I made this mistake and this mistake and this mistake and this mistake and this mistake. And you might think that was, a
self-sabotage.
Yeah, right. But I took that mind map and I actually did this for the first few years and I flipped it over and said, each one of those mistakes is something I learned.
Wow.
And I just kept having that kind of, perspective, and I'm still doing it. I can make a map of all the mistakes I made this week.
Right.
And that's how I really, grown as an entrepreneur and now feel a bit more comfortable running companies. I'm ambitious and want to run even bigger company because a bigger company can have a bigger impact. And for me, it's all about the impact changing the way we approach science education can have. And I need a vehicle to do that, right? I need a vehicle that's going to allow me to have this impact. And that is, a business.
Thanks for watching Practical Talk on YouTube. Listen to full episodes on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. And while you're there, be sure to hit that subscribe button.